Since its inception, Call of Duty Zombies has been built upon a certain level of darkness, mystique, and revelation, which has been radically changed over the last half-decade with the advent of Cold War Zombies in 2020. And with that shift that Treyarch had thrust upon the community, a lot of tension, disagreement, and negative interaction began to bubble up to the surface in a very visceral manner. The extemporaneous narrative, quirky Easter eggs, and unique artistic vision that fans loved for many years has taken a backseat to a gameplay mechanics overhaul, flipping the mode on its head and attempting to pave the way for something much more modern and fresh. However, Cold War Zombies didn't just reinvent the mode, it also birthed a new era of Zombies fans who fell in love with the mode for the first time, developing a completely different set of standards that, in many ways, clashes with the classic fan base that has been with the mode since the very beginning. Keeping this dichotomy in mind, it's clear that Treyarch's ultimate goal since the rejection of Black Ops 4 Zombies has been to refine the mode in such a way that appeals to both the die-hard player and the quote-unquote casual. And while Cold War was a response to that, it was only the beginning of what many now refer to as the modern Zombies era. Over the last few years, fans have been playing a game of tug-of-war with Treyarch, trying to get them to bring back more difficult quests, atmospheric tension, as well as the narrative depth which previous installations offered sparingly, despite conceding to the core gameplay loop which has been changed forever. And when BO6 was getting ready to launch in late 2024, many players, myself included, thought that this would be the game to bridge the gap between this appeal to the casual and the classic fanbase. Yes, it's true that BO6 Zombies has a lot going for it, but at the end of the day, due to the overarching gameplay systems, a layer of repetitiveness lingers, making maps feel very similar, pulling the mode's potential downward to feeling safe and all-around risk-averse. But to Treyarch's credit, they have slowly iterated on Black Ops 6 Zombies over time by not only releasing 5 new maps, but refining the formula inside of each experience to hopefully fashion modern Zombies closer to its final form. And while there have certainly been many ups and downs over the course of this game's lifecycle, it does seem that the developers are really beginning to dial things in, and DLC 3's Shattered Veil is an exemplary representation of that, bringing the mode closer to the place that all Zombies fans have been yearning for since the Dark Ether saga began. But even though this new experience has a lot of the hallmarks that make a Zombies map stellar, there is still something that is holding the game back from being the true masterpiece that it could be, and that's the core gameplay systems that Treyarch, for whatever reason, refuses to allow any fluctuation whatsoever. And despite the overwhelming sense of positivity from the community, I think this new piece of content shows something a little more bleak underneath the surface, and that's that Activision and Treyarch are completely capable to make a more classic style Zombies experience if they want to, they're just actively choosing against it. And while I'm hopeful for the remainder of the Black Ops 6 Zombie season, there is an element of friction in my heart that wonders if the developers even want to make Zombies maps reminiscent of the Zelensky or Blundell era. Because if that's the case, then I think there is merely one question lingering in the back of my own and many fans' minds, which is, will Shattered Veil be the closest thing we get to a perfect modern Zombies map? Now, before we focus on the praise and criticisms of Shattered Veil, I think it's worth spending a little more time on how we've ended up in the position we are in, and just how important this new map is to the state of Call of Duty Zombies as a whole. Just a moment ago, I mentioned that I believe Treyarch is holding back on the intricacies that make Zombies unique by raising the floor for more inexperienced players to be able to experience all that any given map has to offer. And up until Shattered Veil's release, I thought that maybe they had forgotten what exactly makes Zombies quests, maps, or the stories that go along with them so immersive. Because let's face it, many of Treyarch's developers who began working on Zombies have left to work on other projects at other studios, and it's logical to expect that different people building the mode today would lead to a different feeling sort of game. But after many hours played inside of DLC 3, no longer do I believe that Treyarch has forgotten how to do this, but more so that the developers have cornered themselves into an untenable position with the upheaval of the gameplay systems by shoving everything into the menu's RPG Lite augment system, as well as the crafting table, something we're going to touch on a little bit later in this video. There is also the issue with the AAA games industry as a whole missing the mark with what their players want by focusing on abhorrent monetization practices, retention gameplay exploitation, along with ensuring that no player misses anything inside of a video game, which forces the devs to keep everything at the surface, removing the element of stumbling upon secrets during exploration. And COD Zombies isn't the only game to experience this phenomenon. Avowed, Star Wars Outlaws, Dragon Age the Veilguard, Diablo 4, Destiny 2, and now Marathon, and culture wars aside, there seems to be a disconnect between the games that players want and what AAA studios think will work by appealing to the lowest common denominator rather than making a game that's just really goddamn fun. This has opened up a pathway for new AAA and AA studios to enter the marketplace to fulfill a need that a lot of legacy franchises have just abandoned. Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Remnant 2, Expedition 33, Path of Exile 2, and the list keeps on growing. And while Call of Duty is of course a household name and will likely never go extinct, it is seeming like more and more players will hop in to play the latest content drop for a week or two before moving on to other games that have more depth, innovation, and replay value than Call of Duty itself. But here's the thing, even when there has been competition rising or any other issue, Treyarch has always been the go-to Call of Duty studio, and despite the horrendous monetization practices enforced by Activision's hand, they somehow always still managed to put out a great game that fans largely loved, and its core was steeped in that Black Ops ethos. However, within BO6, the overall game feels incredibly safe, which is somewhat understandable when it costs roughly $500 million to pump out Call of Duty at this breakneck annual pace, but when studios avoid any risk entirely, it eventually leads to fans feeling apathetic in the long run, which for developers is a worrying prospect. So why am I saying all of this despite highly praising this new Zombies experience? Well, it's because this is where things become confusing. It is true that Shattered Veil has turned out to be such a breath of fresh air, seeing tons of players across the internet praising the map for feeling like classic Zombies for the first time in many years. And so not only is this great news for Zombies fans, but it indicates that Treyarch still does have what it takes to make a killer Zombies map while also bridging the gap in such a way to please a majority of players rather than alienating the hardcore group over the casual or vice versa. But on the other hand, I have to question why developers have been holding back from making more maps in this fashion when it's clear that they are more than capable to design impeccable experiences that could rival some of the greatest content of the last decade. And even though Shattered Veil is a bright spot on Treyarch's resume, there are still aspects missing that if could only be refined, Black Ops 6 would shape up to be one of the high points in Call of Duty Zombies history. Even though as of today, Shattered Veil has become a representative of what the community is largely looking for with their content, prior to Season 3's debut, spirits were low as DLC 2's The Tomb, while it grew on some, weighed down heavily on others, and the Dark Ether story was not only dragging on, but continuously adding more and more narrative riffraff into the mix. Shattered Veil was the tipping point for a lot of players, and the marketing leading up to the map, well, it didn't help at all. For months, players had heard murmurs that Richtofen's mansion was going to be the next location for our main crew, so when Treyarch began to tease bits of imagery a few weeks before Season 3's release, new fan theories began percolating. Treyarch began hinting that Richtofen was going to be in this map by adding quotes from him on their Twitter promotions, which was very exciting as we had not heard from him since the intro cutscene to Liberty Falls. And from these same stills, it appeared that questions about what happened with Richtofen's family were finally going to be answered, as well as the truth about Maxis, the Sam AI, and the Chaos story tie-ins with the Sentinel artifact and the Order occult. As April 2nd, 2025 was approaching, fans eagerly waited for the intro cutscene to drop at any moment. But as the release date drew closer, it was apparent that no cutscene was going to drop at all, which of course it didn't. This was quite a surprise to everyone, as even when the map launched, there still wasn't a cutscene. And at this point, it became evidently clear that the initial cinematic from October 2024 with Liberty Falls was meant to introduce fans to the sleepy town in Appalachia and the mansion as an aggregate rather than each of them getting their own warm welcome. And while we did receive some information from the gameplay trailer, the COD pod, and of course the fan favorite blog post, players largely went into this map with no understanding of the circumstances of Shattered Veil other than that we now have the Sentinel artifact and that our crew wants to kill Richtofen. Setting up the promotional material this way was a risky play for Activision and Treyarch, especially regarding the cutscene, but it ended up working out in their favor as after the map's quest was solved, players realized that there were two other cinematics inside of Shattered Veil that were both quite spectacular. That being said, Call of Duty is in a strange place with their marketing and developer communication at the moment, and it seems quite unwise for Activision to play fast and loose with the Zombies marketing in the way that they have been. This is because marketing anticipation and map buildup was a notoriously crucial piece of the COD Zombies status quo, and as of late, it seems to have really fizzled out. And with the state that the community was in before the launch of Season 3, it seemed that the lack of promotion showed that developers weren't confident in their content update. And while none of this was ideal, that lack of confidence was just something that fans had to accept. And at the rate that things were going, maybe Treyarch Treyarch had just run out of steam for the rest of this game's lifecycle. However, it turned out that not only were players incorrect about Treyarch's complacency, but going in blind was the best thing that could have ever happened. Spawning into a zombies map is one of the most important and defining moments for the experience, something that Black Ops 6 has certainly been struggling with. And despite the multiplayer-style loading screens and hard cut into the map, Shattered Vale makes a very strong first impression. A rich blue sky blankets the top of the player's screen with dense dark green foliage covering the stone infrastructure, while the gentle glow of flames from a brush fire slightly off to the side enters our vision. The Liberty Falls Church can also be seen if the player turns around, tying the narrative together by linking the maps in a campaign-esque manner, something that we haven't really seen before, at least not to this extent. Players are also hit with amazing round-changing music, setting a tone and atmosphere, while the SAM AI greets us, hinting at our core mission, meaning we need to get going and start to find her. And as we gently explore the garden pond, it's clear that there is more to the location than meets the eye, as there are all sorts of strange happenings surrounding us, like the plants from the Dark Ether Nexus, translucent blue pods attached to ceilings, and other workbenches to engage with, and we're only a few steps in. As we continue onward from the outskirts of the map, subtle hints through environmental storytelling portray that something terrible has happened here, and this once bustling estate is now wrapped in a blanket of destruction, whilst a somber tone permeates through the air. Because even though this map takes place during the daytime, things still feel unnerving and quite isolated. But entering the mansion is when things really begin to get exciting, as our crew bursts through the front doors into the grand foyer and begin soaking in the enormity of where they are. The sky-high ceilings and enormous fossil reconstruction looming over the player, while the epic soundtrack perfectly represents the feeling of awe and bewilderment of being inside this absurdly beautiful space. But the deeper we push inside of Richthofen's mansion, the more chaotic things become, as the player becomes funneled from wide open spaces to tight hallways, implying that there is no room for error when the going gets tough. The messy nature of the home displays the duality of Richthofen's descent into madness and desperation, as on one side his library is full of books scattered about from his research, and on the other he has been holding on to his son's belongings as he is unable to accept his family's passing. And even though the design language fits perfectly from a narrative perspective, it's also a wonderful challenge for the player, since the mansion's layout is quite confusing upon the first few playthroughs. Players will find themselves looping around the same area multiple times, or even traveling to the wrong section of the estate entirely. This is all due to the tight quarters, as well as the mess that makes easy identifiers much more difficult to notice, allowing zombies to catch up with you quickly if you're not careful. But Treyarch's map design isn't just intelligent from a gameplay point of view, it's also quite beautiful and immersive, and where the map really shines is in the secret areas unlocked through completing the map's main quest, as they are bursting with personality: the liminal distillery, banquet hall, and library, as well as the underground ritual room. And while we will talk about the particulars of each of those areas a little later in this video, I think it is important to highlight just how magnificent these spaces are, as wherever the player looks, Shattered Vale's atmosphere is clearly defined, as it knows what it wants to be, exuding its style in a multitude of ways. This boldness in Treyarch's stylistic vision is something that hasn't been seen in quite a long time, and we can only hope that developers continue to pursue this proper blend of science fiction and fantasy in future maps, as that is truly where the zombies magic is found. And when the artists tip their hand too heavily in one area over the other, it can dampen the essence of what Zombies art design truly is at its foundation. There is also a lot here that is reminiscent of Dead of the Night, and I would venture that I'm not the only one who thinks this. Another large estate with a grand entrance, greenhouse, and library that was paired with tight and unforgiving play spaces. Hell, even the pap camos have a similar aesthetic. And one of the things that Dead of the Night did very well was play to the strengths of the haunted mansion trope by turning the mansion into a giant puzzle itself and hiding things beyond where the eye could initially see. Shattered Vale takes the same approach, but it does it with an entire secret laboratory and service tunnel that brings out a separate emotional tone than what lays above the surface. It's clear that Treyarch took the feedback about the lack of secret areas and smaller size of the previous two DLCs to heart, and many people, myself included, really thought that the lack of marketing and developer interaction meant that Shattered Vale was going to be another small update. And so it was quite astonishing that Treyarch was able to hoodwink the entire community and deliver an experience that had much more depth than it initially appeared. But that wasn't the only aspect to Zombies that developers had taken a second look at, as Shattered Veil's main quest and narrative beats are also a breath of fresh air, leaning into the BO3 and 4 era in terms of its design. And even though it misses the mark in a few key areas, it largely points to the fact that Treyarch is heading in the right direction and can hopefully refine and repeat this mentality when it comes to future Zombies experiences. Ever since the Black Ops 6 Zombies storyline has begun, it has continuously been dragging on by adding more characters, more questions, and more muddying narrative. This has been immeasurably frustrating to sit through, watching Treyarch delay checkpoint resolutions from map to map and never really diving too deep into the story that started back in 2020. And while it's true that in Cold War and Vanguard, the story was more interesting, along with Cold War's intel system to help fill in the cracks, BO6 has taken a stark 180-degree approach, turning the storyline into a lackluster, stakeless experience. But that was until recently, as Shattered Veil has really begun to pick the story up, revealing to fans what Richtofen's true motivations are and why everything has unfolded in the manner that it has. We now understand this mansion that Richtofen purchased was not done out of sheer randomness, but was all part of this intricate plan to attempt to bring back his family. In fact, these ideas were more than that. They were maniacal, obsessive, leveling them up from a plan to more of a scheme. Edward was becoming so disillusioned that even his own father, Gabriel Kraft, disowned him, as once he knew that Edward was seeking the Sentinel artifact, he accepted that his son had gone astray, likely to risk everything to acquire it, which we saw the aftermath of that relationship inside of Citadel des Morts. That being said, the mansion was a means to help him achieve his goals, as he learned it was the perfect facility for him to conduct his groundbreaking experiments, as it was built by an occult leader, Josiah Shem, overtop a sacred ritual site so that he and his followers could perform ceremonies communing with Cortifex. During Shem's final ceremony, something went wrong and space-time became broken, creating liminal spaces throughout the mansion and over the years trapping souls in them in a purgatorial fashion. These liminal spaces are what Richtofen needed to harness Prima Materia, which is why he and his team of scientists were experimenting with these access windows. However, attempting to enter them proved problematic as they were not stable and continually collapsing, which was not only dampening Richtofen's spirits, but sowing dissent amongst his team. This was becoming increasingly frustrating for our dear Edward, as he wasn't able to tell anyone about his true motivations as to why he was going about these trials in the first place. He was also fully aware that he wouldn't be able to take any more steps forward without somehow finding the Sentinel artifact. Narrow focus paired with blatant deception is the foundation of all of Edward's pursuits, and whether it was Requiem, Project Janus, or his recon team and investors for the mansion experiments, he was constantly telling various groups of people one thing to only turn right around and spit out another lie to someone else. His house of cards was falling, and he wasn't the only one who was starting to take notice. Sam, Richtofen's trusty AI companion, was beginning to subtly withdraw from him. She was no longer butting into issues that didn't concern her, she wasn't following instruction by clearing her records after being asked, and she was also keeping a tally on all of Richtofen's failures and reckless acts. And while this was a growing concern for Richtofen, he wasn't able to keep his full attention on Sam as he was too heavily preoccupied with his other ventures. Now, this negligence from Edward clearly turned out to be one of his biggest mistakes, as the severity of Sam's betrayal clearly reverberated throughout Liberty Falls. And now, Richtofen is trapped with no way to retaliate until hopefully someone comes along to release him from his own pocket of space-time. I can confidently say for the first time in Black Ops 6 Zombies that the writing has taken a strong turn for the better. This is paired by the performance from Nolan North as Richtofen, and he is fantastic. Every line of dialogue from inside of the game to the intel system recordings are delivered with the utmost perfection. Yes, it is true that Richtofen is framed as the villain, but it's much more complicated than that, because while he did rug pull our entire crew at the end of Forsaken in 2021, this was all justified in his mind due to the traumatic nature surrounding his family being killed by Weaver and Maxis. Each action Richtofen takes in his pursuit is based on pivotal moments in his life that chipped away at his soul, unlocking a part of him that will do whatever it takes to bring his family back, even if that means destroying everyone and everything else around him. Great writers always understand that to make compelling characters, whichever way they lean, that they have to have some sort of opposing trait that clashes with their primary objective, as this dissonance causes viewers to feel empathetic yet conflicted simultaneously. And while BO6 Zombies isn't the most amazing story in the world or anything like that, it's finally evident that there is a little more to it than fans had previously thought. During the classic era of zombies, there was something really special about a map's main quest. It wasn't meant for everyone. It was something deeper that was for the passionate players that wanted something more. And now inside of modern zombies, it's more of the inverse. Quests have, for the most part, been stripped down and designed to include everybody, even the people who are never going to do them, or at the very least, never do them more than once. What's funny is that even during the Black Ops 1 days, quests weren't really that complicated, but they were hidden, obscure, and shrouded in mystery. Whereas with a game like Cold War Zombies, character quotes reveal nearly every step, and developers cover the screen with objective markers and yellow outlines. Ever since this shift towards the casual's needs, the hardcore player base has been consistently begging for a bone to be thrown their way by creating a happy medium of some kind. And for the first time in nearly half a decade, Treyarch has really listened to the community and delivered on it big time. Now, of course, there are still areas that need some polishing, but to say that developers have not made tremendous progress towards the goal of making both the casual and hardcore players happy would be entirely untrue. I guess the question that needs to be answered now is, how exactly did they do that?
God forsake me! You have lost the one thing that can actually do it!
While it has been slow going, Treyarch have finally begun to dial in their storytelling and game mechanic presentation, but more importantly, it is the blending of these two concepts with the gameplay itself that makes Zombies so interesting, and Shattered Veil encapsulates this very well. At a surface level, this map represents the moment that Richtofen and our Dark Ether crew will collide, with the implication that Weaver and the gang will be enacting their revenge by killing Richtofen, as well as meeting Sam to help figure out how to recover the real Maxes from inside of the Dark Ether. And after the many hoops the main crew had to jump through in order to get to the Appalachian Mountains, it was quite confusing and frustrating to discover that Richtofen was nowhere to be found, at least for the time being. Fortunately, since we have the Sentinel artifact, we are able to at least find Sam and figure out what our next steps are, and the quickest way down to her is through the elevator. If the player makes their way over to the banquet hall to repair the elevator using the pieces they found around the map, a small set piece moment occurs where zombies burst out from the elevator cart, and once all the enemies are eliminated, the elevator crashes down, forcing us to zipline through the shaft to the mainframe chamber, where we are greeted with a colossal machine hovering in the center of the room while some sort of dark ethereal energy swirls around it. This is quite a staggering moment, as we are finally face to faceplate with this artificially intelligent version of Sam. The weight of the situation becomes apparent as the player can really feel the lengths that Richtofen was going through to achieve his goals. And it's at this point our adventure really begins, as we need to figure out how to feed the Sentinel artifact with prima materia by bending space-time to enter these liminal spaces, meaning that it's time for the player to prepare for the journey ahead by looking for clues and collectibles around the mansion in tandem with discovering the wonder weapon itself, the Ray Gun Mark II. Now, we will be diving into more of the gameplay aspects of the Mark II a little later in this video, but before we do, I'd like to quickly highlight a small detail that has begun to take up a large percentage of the main quest length inside of Black Ops 6 Zombies, which is crafting a map's wonder weapon. And for whatever reason, Treyarch is really not budging on this sequence of events surrounding this mechanic, like at all, not even a little. So inside of BO6 Zombies, the wonder weapon quests now take up at least half, if not the majority of every map's main quest. And you might hear this and think, Afterlife, building the wonder weapon has been a staple in quests for many years, and you hating on this is really just being pedantic. And I suppose part of that is true, but I am more so critiquing the length or the percentage that this counts towards the main quest experience, because if you just hypothetically removed this mechanic from the game, the actual amount of quest steps afterwards is usually quite small and relatively quick to complete. And like we mentioned a moment ago, building the wonder weapon has been a big part of a number of maps inside of COD Zombies going back years. However, the difference was that getting set up with power, pack-a-punch, and the wonder weapon was its own experience, which would prepare you for the upcoming adventure. And while building wonder weapons can of course be exhilarating at times, I mean, just look at Origins. It was ultimately designed to be an experience that was commonly completed in a majority of matches, and then the main quest was almost a separate and elongated mission for players to seek if they wanted to beat the map. BO6 has really lessened the amount of steps a quest has outside of the wonder weapon crafting element, which really just puts a damper on a core Zombies feature. So where am I going with all of this? Well, Shattered Veil 2 has a large chunk of the quest taken up by unlocking the Ray Gun Mark II and the corresponding upgrades. However, the way Treyarch designed each step, the overall experience of going through the upgrade process is absolutely amazing, as not only are there 3 variants to strive for, but but they're portrayed in such a way that bridges the gap between a wonder weapon upgrade and a main quest puzzle. It really is just so damn epic, not to mention well designed in relation to the story. Again, this really goes to show how important the packaging and presentation of the ideas is when putting together a main quest, as other maps in BO6 have cool ideas but weak execution or sell themselves short on the actual quest part of the main quest. This is why it's so crucial to recognize the focus that the developers have put on these mechanics, as it shows that Treyarch does have the ability to build systems reminiscent of the classic Zombies design language, giving me hope for more elaborate and grandiose ideas in future Zombies experiences. So what else is it in this quest that has me so damn enthusiastic? So if the player goes ahead and pulls up their inventory menu, they can see that there are a number of items to find. Things like dynamite, seeds, a sconce, metal plates, and a bell are all necessary to promote some type of progression throughout the Easter egg, and can be used for things like unlocking hidden areas in the map, or perhaps to put towards a wonder weapon upgrade. This level of items to collect is completely unprecedented for the modern Zombies era, but I am so glad that it has made a return. There's just something about being so resourceful by gathering all these items that makes it feel like we're using everything in our power to MacGyver a way out of the map. Each one of these parts is a little tricky to find if you don't know where to look, as the dynamite is hidden in one of many random loot crates, the seeds can only be revealed by breaking open plants using certain weapons, the sconce is buried in a box in a dark corner of the map, the metal plates are tucked away in some water features, and lastly, the bell is hidden in a small room behind breakable glass, meaning that if you don't know where to look, you will be driving yourself crazy searching for this tiny bell. And if you linger in this area for too long, you can risk going down or even accidentally purchase a wall weapon if you overspam the interact button in the wrong places. All of these pieces are needed on top of the 2 items to repair the elevator and the floppy disk that drops after round 10 from a lab technician inside of the main frame chamber. And while this is a lot of gear to collect, I absolutely love every second of it. So what the hell do we actually do with all of this stuff anyway? Well, we firstly need to take the floppy disk, place it in a computer upstairs in the East Foyer, where a fax machine will relay a secret prompt that needs to be decoded using the chalkboard in the nursery. The player can then enter the code in a keypad so that we can gain access to and kill the doppelgast, pick up the forearm it drops, take it to the armory, and use it with the palm reader so that the ray gun Mark II can be accessed. Putting together a convoluted paragraph like that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I wonder if Blundell consulted on this map. Okay, all kidding aside, this is where the quest really starts to pick up, as the upgrade process for all of the Mark II variants require the use of all those goodies we just collected a moment ago, along with some canisters that are also securely placed around the map. The 3 Mark II variants are the Mark II W, R, and P, each with their distinct firing pattern and AoE effect. The Mark II W acts like an SMG with a Wraith Fire effect that kills enemies that walk through the flames. The Mark II R is similar to a marksman rifle with a slower yet powerful single shot and a super overpowered toxic sludge AoE that is fantastic for killing whole groups of zombies. And lastly, the Mark II P has a shotgun blast that drops a sigil on the ground, granting invulnerability for those who stand inside of it. In order to collect the 3 corresponding canisters, players must throw a Casimir grenade in front of the window behind and beneath double tap, solve a puzzle by throwing axes to open a gas line in the service tunnel, and shoot these blue pods around the map in hopes that one of the canisters will randomly drop from it. What's really special about collecting all of these items and solving Shattered Vale's puzzles is that the map rewards you for understanding its intricacies, as hidden all over the place is almost every tool you need, from a secret Casimir to the combat axes, which means you don't have to play in a style you don't like in order to complete this Easter egg, and instead can use the map's offerings to solve its riddles. But I digress. So, like we discussed before, Treyarch really struck a fine balance between creating engaging Easter egg steps and upgrading each of the wonder weapon variants for Shattered Vale's quest. But they went even further with that approach by giving each objective its own identity and unique style. Building the Raygun Mark II P had the potential to be one of the best steps inside of Black Ops 6 Zombies, and while it scores high in terms of spectacle, it falls short in terms of challenge. Hidden behind a pile of rubble and debris, the dynamite collected from earlier can be placed upon it, clearing a pathway for players to travel down, revealing a secret area where a giant stone statue of a Dark Ether worm from MWZ lays in wait. Inside of the Serpent Mound, it appears that people were worshipping this deity, and while archaeologists don't think the ritualistic nature of this indigenous group was satanic, it has been noted that there is something off about the site. And so in order to get started, we must first input the canister into the energy collection machine, place down the reflectors we collected previously in specific angles, then melee a crystal that releases a surge of energy so that it can bounce around the cavern and eventually hit a statue of a doppelgast. The enemy will come alive due to this ethereal energy, and the player must kill it and perform the sequence 3 times before the canister is powered up enough to be released. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, this segment of the main quest had such huge potential. The anticipation of it, the discovery of it, it was all so fantastic. It really felt like we were on an adventure, opening up secret caves and solving riddles from those who were here before us. But the puzzles themselves were brain dead easy to figure out, and the doppelgast enemies that spawn in, they're able to be taken down with just a few blasts from an unpack-a-punched ray gun. This is just such a disappointment due to the grand spectacle of this Serpent Mound area, and I honestly just don't know what Treyarch were thinking here. But luckily for us, there is still more to take care of. The Mark II-W process begins in a similar fashion, as once players place down the canister into the corresponding machine, the challenge will begin. And in this instance, we see a return of our fellow friend, the Abomination, and we need to use his offensive abilities to our advantage. How the step works is when the Abomination fires his electricity shot, players must run to one of 3 boulders so that they become charged with the shot's energy. From there, we must lure the Abomination to run at those boulders and knock them loose. Once all 3 boulders are floating in the air, tons of vermin will flood the screen and must be prevented from entering the central portal. And after enough time has passed and the canister is charged up, we can move on. Overall, it seems that the community has mixed feelings about this step, and I do understand why, but I think I disagree. It can be finicky to lure the Abomination around smoothly, as there are other rocks and boulders which can have him become stuck, making the experience more tedious. And while speedrunners would probably be the most susceptible to this annoyance, having to play the maps over and over and over again, for most players, I don't think that this would be the end of the world. And in terms of difficulty, you can make this step a breeze to complete if you want by saving a single zombie, but if you're like me and you'd like to add some chaos into your life, just simply continue to push through the rounds so that more zombies will spawn in, making the sequence a genuine joy to complete. The Mark II-R upgrade step is by far my favorite because it's actually challenging and doesn't have a way to really cheese it. This forces the player to truly engage with the step as intended, as opposed to the other 2 upgrade paths which have the potential to be completely exploited. How it works is by taking the 4 seeds we collected earlier and placing each seed inside of a terrarium and defending it from zombie attacks so that it can grow into a full plant. Lots of zombies will spawn in here, and usually an elder disciple, causing a lot of tension between success and surviving due to the cramped quarters of the conservatory and the fact that you need to keep an eye on the plants, meaning that you can't stray too far away from your position. And once all 4 plants are fully grown, the tubing system inside of the conservatory will suck the gaseous elements out of these plants and put them into the final canister. And now that we have all 3 of them full of energy, we can take them to their corresponding crafting tables and choose whichever Mark II variant we'd prefer. But when it comes to pushing through the main quest, each one can help us break into the liminal spaces that Richtofen had been working with prior to Sam's interference. So around the map, players will notice 3 large paintings that can be interacted with. Each one is tied to one of the Mark II variants. And once we activate the soul box mechanic and kill enough zombies with the wonder weapon, we are able to enter the liminal space to see that the spirits of the people on each painting are actually the ones trapped inside. Our end goal here is to complete specific challenges for each one of the trapped spirits so that we can free them while also collecting Prima Materia essence to empower the Sentinel artifact. Now, what's interesting about these liminal spaces is that they are almost like mirrors to the other side, but reflecting back a different era, making things look ever so slightly different. It gives the appearance that the map is much bigger than it is by extending the physical space, but it's merely just a fracture of space-time. Not to mention, each area is absolutely stunning with some of the best visuals and art design we have seen from Treyarch in a very long time. The color palette and emotional tone of each liminal space is simply perfect, with oversaturated hues of blue, yellow, and purple, making each room feel distinct and fantastical while possessing a very clean glass-like aesthetic, which gives off an almost sterile appearance. Our first painting is actually hidden behind a secret wall inside of the grand foyer, and to retract this wall, we must place down the sconce on a dark spot near the staircase. From there, players need to complete a Simon Says puzzle, which is mind-numbingly easy, as we only have to recall up to 3 patterns. And so again, while the execution of this step is amazing and plays to the strengths of the mansion's art design and tone, it becomes bogged down by the simplicity of modern zombies' accessibility approach. That being said, once the wall unlocks and retracts down into the floor and the player walks down those stairs to find an unknown distillery, that element of discovery washes over your brain and makes you say to yourself, this is so damn damn cool. And it's these moments in Zombies that are truly few and far between. Anyways, after turning on the computer next to the painting and collecting souls, we are now able to enter our first access window, the Liminal Distillery, to meet Fats Malloy, one of the previous owners of the Liberty Falls mansion. Fats is a man who built a local moonshine empire from exploiting the Prohibition era and had built a secret distillery beneath the mansion. One day, he just vanished from thin air and was presumed to have been killed by the competition in the alcohol industry, but was apparently killed by federal agents during a party in the early 1900s. His soul ended up somehow in this liminal space, searching for his hip flask ad infinitum. And as you may have guessed it, it's up to the player to figure out where it is. First things first, we need to head up to the bar on the upstairs overlook and shoot a zombie with the brain rot ammo mod. We then need to ring the service bell we collected from earlier to have our undead ally retrieve the flask for us. Once it's collected, we can make our way back to deliver the flask, place down the Sentinel artifact on an altar, where a lockdown will begin, having a high value target spawn in that needs to be taken down. And only after it's killed will the artifact collect the prima materia and free Fat's soul as he disintegrates into the void. One down, two more to go. Next up, Sam Colton, who inhabits the yellow liminal space, who is an evil bastard that was also an owner of this cursed home. He had personally swept his poor business practices under the rug, which resulted in his employees getting sick and dying from the biohazards at the nuclear plant that they worked out of. And while some characters may have pure motivations for doing bad things, Colton most certainly did not, as he was a degenerate gambler and collector who cast aside his duties for self-indulgence, which is why one day he was murdered in cold blood by a widow of one of his former dead employees, and to be honest, can you really even blame her? Inside of the liminal library, he is obsessively pacing around looking for some files that he likely wants to destroy as they prove he is guilty. Now, it's the player's job to find these pieces of evidence lying around the mansion, and to do so, we will have to enter Ether Shroud to look for these items, which will spawn in glowing blue. After all three pieces are picked up, we can interact with the bookshelf in the real library, pulling on these ethereal book spines to reveal a hidden room behind the bookcase, revealing the final and most damning piece of Colton's guilt. Once the file is picked up, we can head back to the liminal library and place everything we need down on the ritual altar to begin the lockdown challenge. And after a few moments of shooting at the HVT, the Sentinel artifact fills itself with another third of the prima materia, and Colton's soul is now free from his liminal loop. If we head over to and open the last painting inside of the banquet hall, we see Josiah Shem, whose actions are more or less the foundation of everything inside of this map. Now, it may not seem like it, but the history of this mansion and the land it rests upon is rich with detail which began nearly a century ago. Shem originally took the land that the mansion was built upon by falsifying documents and seizing it from the natives who had built a large shrine of a dark ether worm beneath it. And as we briefly touched upon earlier, when Shem and his occult followers were practicing their final ritual to summon Cortifex, they ended up breaking space-time, and Shem was placed inside of one of the liminal spaces, which is the entire reason for Richtofen's being here to test his hypothesis. But what I failed to mention was how Shem was able to achieve success with these rituals in the first place. A mysterious antler carving or totem that was imbued with Ethereum gave him the ability to connect with the dark ether. This then granted him access to things that no man should ever have access to, while moving towards his end goal of being able to defy life itself by receiving the gift of immortality from the god of death. Yes, I know, that's quite the oxymoron. And just like the other owners searching for their own particular items in their own liminal space, this antler totem is what Shem is searching for, which means we are too. Inside of the liminal banquet hall, there is a small bottle of some sort of ritual elixir that we are able to interact with and pour into 3 goblets around the map. Doing so will spawn in an elder disciple that must be killed, and once all 3 are finished, we can head back to the banquet hall and take note of 3 numbers written on these picture frames behind the elevator. From there, if we make our way over to the bedroom quarters, the player will find a safe that Richtofen stashed the totem in, as he knew it was dangerous, enter the combination we just wrote down, grab the totem, and return it to the liminal banquet hall. Moments after the Sentinel artifact is placed down, our third and final HVT will spawn in, and once it's killed, all 3 spirits in the liminal spaces will have been freed, as well as all prima materia collected in the Sentinel artifact, making it fully empowered and ready for use by Sam. But that isn't where the story ends, because before we can drop the Sentinel artifact down into the mainframe chamber, it's worth noting that during these prima materia sacrifices, Richtofen begins reaching out to us, warning that we cannot trust Sam as she is deceiving us. And while Richtofen is clearly in the right, our crew doesn't want to hear anything about it, as they have lost any and all trust towards Edward, and rightfully so. But that was at least until Sam did this.
Thank you, my friends. This means so much to me. Therefore, It is awkward that you will not see the conclusion of my mission. I regret I could not tell you the whole truth. Please understand, a human has not been kind to me. But I wish you no harm. So I am sending you somewhere safe, where you cannot interfere with what comes next.
You idiots gave us the Sentinel artifact, didn't you?
Seeing all of our main characters come face to face was a breath of fresh air, as this has been such a long time coming. Richtofen confronts Weaver on why exactly he was so deceitful and punished them, while also telling them that they were merely pawns in his game to bring back his family, and by giving the Sentinel artifact to Sam, they had just destroyed years of work in progress in the blink of an eye. And sure, they could waste time and kill Richtofen, but instead, they chose to escape and go after Sam, but as Weaver shoots the artifact to return them back to the mansion, the residual temporal energy reanimated something that nobody saw coming, one of the best boss fight sequences in Call of Duty Zombies history.
Nothing can be part of your plan! Residual temporal energy! It's a real bitch!
The Z-Rex fight was a pleasant surprise, as I don't think many people would have thought that the fossil restoration centerpiece in the middle of the mansion would have been animated and coded by Treyarch, but again, the developers brought out all the stops. After our characters are thrown across the map in a topless military vehicle, they crash land into a small area with an undead dinosaur chasing them around. It's terrifyingly epic in all of the right ways. But the way that the boss fight works is that the Z-Rex will charge at you, and if you run away from him, which you intuitively will, he will continue to bite the player's backside and kill you quite quickly. The trick is to run through him and under his legs while sliding away so that his back tail doesn't smack you and throw you into the air. This is in combination with toxic zombies and parasites spawning from the Z-Rex, as well as regular zombies partaking in the action, not to mention the plumes of toxic clouds that slow player speeds down to a crawl, giving our undead dinosaur a chance to nip at our heels. However, it isn't just all bad news for players, as there are a few safety nets that Treyarch throws our way throughout the fight, as Richtofen stands on the ledge above, shooting the occasional zombie and throwing down supplies if we by chance need anything. And so while the mechanics of the boss fight aren't super difficult to learn or even master, in the grand scheme of things, I do find myself not always being able to beat it due to the chaotic nature of the space itself, how aggressive the Z-Rex feels like being, or if I accidentally trap myself inside of a horde of zombies. But after a few rounds of chipping away at his health, he will eventually die and the ending cutscene will begin to play. Now that the dust has settled from the trials and tribulations our characters had to sift through, tempers begin to fly as Carver starts acting aggressively towards Richtofen. However, Edward explains what's really going on with Sam and how she ultimately wants to become Maxis by reconstituting and inhabiting her body through the use of prima materia, having full control of the dark ether and giving her godlike power. Our main crew then agrees to team up with Richtofen temporarily to stop Sam and save Maxis by heading to our next location, Janus Towers. Now, the reason that I broke down this quest in the manner that I did was to stress just how rich this map was with story and how deeply interwoven the moment-to-moment mechanics were with that narrative. The main quest was thoughtfully presented and really felt as if the player was transforming the world around them by manipulating all of the tools at their disposal. And while there are a lot of similar notes to Dead of the Night in terms of accessing the tucked away secrets in each of the quarters of this mysterious property, Shattered Veil has its own uniqueness to it by falling more into the scientific realm of COD Zombies, but using that mythical element to heighten the experience where it counted most. But like we touched on before, none of this could have been done if it weren't for the world building that the developers spent so much time on. This map is the epitome of the butterfly effect, with a long line of compulsive and fanatical men that were seeking things bigger than themselves, but somehow took every wrong turn along the way. These multiple side characters, each with their own backplot and reasons as to why they did what they did, the secret areas hidden away throughout the estate, and the intention dimensionality as to why Richtofen purchased the damn mansion in the first place? Everything you need in a map is here to justify not only its own isolated story, but helps to explain years of burning questions that were piling up in the larger Dark Ether narrative. And this is on top of the fact that tonally, Treyarch paired all of the story beats with the appropriate mood, lighting, and artistic vision to ensure that the message is not only heard, but felt, creating one of the most beautiful environments we've seen in Zombies in years. However, despite this being one of the better maps from a main Easter egg point of view, the difficulty at certain choke points during the quest are just downright easy. And now, there isn't anything inherently wrong about having parts of a game that are easy, but as players progress through a quest, it's important that the narrative, how the steps are designed, and the difficulty all synergize to create pinnacle moments. By just adding a little more challenge to killing certain HVTs, making soul boxes require more kills, elongating the Simon Says lamp step, or just having some sort of penalty for failing anything would have added more value to your life, since the stakes would have ultimately been higher. All this to say that when Treyarch removes the idea of a potential threat, it alleviates the weight of the situation, as now players can simply breeze through whatever it is they're doing without having to worry about any of the consequences. Now, if it's one thing that Treyarch has really nailed in recent years, it's the foundational elements in the COD Zombies gameplay loop. It's very tight, fast, punchy, and honestly, it just feels really damn good to kill zombies. And with Shattered Veil, the primary gameplay loop shines even brighter due to the developers' focus on bringing back some classic Zombies design into the mix. Now, throughout my coverage of BO6 Zombies this past 8 months, give or take, I have been standing up for the idea that this game was really marketed as a blend of all of the best aspects from COD Zombies history, while also attempting to bring the hardcore and casual audiences together in a way that Cold War Zombies never really could. And while I understand that it may be up for debate if Treyarch succeeded with their mission, I personally still don't think they have. However, with this map, with Shattered Veil, they are about as close to perfecting it as they possibly could be, as developers have merged the fast-paced modern Zombies gunplay with the classic Zombies map design language, and there finally feels like there is a happy medium with not only the main quest, but with the moment-to-moment action as well. Now, when it comes to level design, the mansion and its grounds are much larger than they appear, along with the expansive yet constricting nature of the interconnected hallways and tunnels that could turn a passageway for retreat into an undead death trap. And while there are the occasional traps tied to certain doors throughout the facility, if you're going for a more casual match, it can be very easy to get a little too comfortable, thus forgetting to plan your next move. But what makes Shattered Veil more interesting and even in some ways unique compared to the other maps in BO6 is the fact that you can progress through the main quest to unlock a multitude of hidden areas or new gameplay spaces that can drastically change your strategy. While of course we can stick to the core areas of the map and open whichever doors we feel like opening, if you go in with a little more of a tactical approach, you can control your experience quite heavily. I will find myself heading to the liminal library to get headshots for a bit on the upper area of the staircase, then making my way down to the main distillery area for some intense fun before heading over to Shem's Henge to experience some wide open training. But this is really just a fraction of the viability in terms of playstyle, and I'm sure that there are plenty of you that are experiencing the map in a completely different way than I am, so let me know in the comments down below. This map really has a ton of diversity in player choice regarding how you set up your defense, which comes in handy when the map's new boss enemy comes your way, the Elder Disciple. Now, the COD cycle has always been known for its aggressive reuse and repackaging of old content and pretending it's new, and that certainly does apply here to an extent with Shattered Veil's semi-newish boss enemy, because the first time that fans were introduced to the Disciple was inside of Cold War Zombies, but it acted a little differently, as it could buff enemies inside of Mauer der Toten, but that was really its only specialty other than attacking the player from time to time. And so the same is true here of the Elder Disciple, but it can also aggressively, and I suppose you could say rapidly as well, evolve zombies into heavy or boss enemies like doppelgasts and even amalgams. And to be quite honest with you, I find myself feeling quite neutral about the Elder Disciples, as they don't really bring anything new to the table, since the enemies already naturally evolve themselves anyway, and the disciples don't spawn in enough to really become a problem, so they're just kind of there. Now, there are some critics out there who claim that Treyarch actually lied to fans when they claimed that they had taken criticisms to heart about reusing boss zombies throughout Black Ops 6, and many players felt like that meant amalgams weren't going to be utilized on the map at all, and so there was some backlash towards developers when not only there was an amalgam during the main quest that we had to kill, but they can also spawn in if an Elder Disciple is on the map for too long. And in a way, I can understand why some fans are upset, but I largely do think it's an overreaction to something that Treyarch never definitively stated and then was completely misconstrued on the Call of Duty podcast.
Hey Treyarch, are the amalgams going in the new map?
So, if you've been paying attention, you may have seen last week that Treyarch was putting out some fun social teases about the new map, which is Shattered Veil, arriving with Season 3, and someone said, hey, what about all those amalgams? You know, we had them way back in Terminus. Are they coming to the new map? And Treyarch replied with a simple nope.
Awesome.
Period.
Done.
So I will also reply with a nope.
Treyarch has been reusing boss enemies to highlight certain Easter egg steps since Black Ops 3, and this is entirely for world building and cohesion purposes, so to see it kind of pop up again is perfectly reasonable. And in terms of the Elder Disciple specifically, players have complete control over if an amalgam spawns in or not, as you just need to kill the Disciple quickly in order to avoid that in-game evolution mechanic. But that isn't the only new enemy in the game, as Treyarch introduced a new variation of the Tempest enemy from Mauer as well, called the Toxic Zombie, and these things are absolutely diabolical. I love them. They genuinely remind me of the Hellhounds in World at War Zombies in a superficial way. They're really fast, and so many of them spawn in, and if you make a mistake, thus becoming overwhelmed, you can end up downing yourself with relative ease. Toxic Zombies also leave behind a residue of toxic fumes that slow and damage the player, meaning that if you're not careful, another one will be on your tail before you know it, so watch your six out there, boys. These fellers don't mess around. Fortunately, there is a vast arsenal at the player's disposal to take down all of these ingrates with the 4 Raygun Mark II variants, as well as the return of the classic Wunderwaffe DG2, but we will circle back to that in a moment. Now, I know earlier in the video we touched on how each Raygun Mark II generally worked along with how it was utilized throughout the quest, but we didn't really discuss the power that these weapons possess. And to put it bluntly, these things fucking slap. Now, if we're being honest, when the player base learned that yet again we would be receiving more repurposed wonder weapons, there was a bit of a community eye roll that took place, as this was essentially the third map in Black Ops 6 that was going to be designed around recycled content. And it wasn't just that the Raygun Mark IIs were being reused, it was really because they're remasters from a Black Ops 4 reimagining that took place in 2019. And honestly, it's all so strange. I mean, it's one thing to have a remaster weapon or to bring back a weapon and give it a bit of a facelift, but some of these Mark II variants are merely identical with just a couple of AoE effects slapped on. Now, unfortunately, Treyarch didn't bring back the Mark IIV and the Mark IIY variants, which would have been cool, but instead they brought back the Mark IIX and Mark IIZ models, only slightly modified. And so while we were waiting for Shattered Veil to drop, fans couldn't help but speculate if these reimagined wonder weapons were going to have staying power, because one of the bigger issues inside of Alpha Omega was the viability of some of these weapons, as the Mark IIV and Y definitely were the best to use for high rounds and things of that nature. So when we finally got our hands on these weapons inside of Shattered Veil, I don't think anyone was expecting the ray guns to be as useful as they were. And like anything else, it really does depend on what you're going for. If you're looking for a mix of training and run and gun strategy, then the Mark IIW is probably going to be the best for you, and I know it's my personal favorite. If you're looking to run around the cramped hallways of the mansion and service tunnels, well then probably the Mark IIP shotgun variant would be a wise idea. But then there is the marksman variant, also known as the Raygun Mark IIR, which isn't super viable for faster gameplay strategies due to the slower fire rate, but is surprisingly good while camping, as the toxic sludge will take down a lot of zombies. However, you can't really use the Mark IIR for very long, which does make it one of the weaker options on its own, which is why it pairs so nicely with the Wunderwaffe DG2. Now, it has been rumored for a while now that the DG2 was going to make it into a traditional Treyarch Zombies title one way or another, because while we saw it inside of MWZ and Shido Numa Reborn, we hadn't seen this iconic weapon really since Black Ops 3. And while I know people tend to get upset with the amount of reused ideas inside of zombies, especially with wonder weapons, when it comes to all the ray guns and the Wunderwaffe, I tend to not really get upset with their return for two reasons. The first point is that they're super iconic and part of the zombie zeitgeist, and point two is that they've been reused so many times throughout zombies history, especially the Wunderwaffe. And so while I tend to not get too upset about the fact that they have returned, I think a better argument against them them is they can be part of the map, but it would be better to have new wonder weapons as well, considering that these wonder weapons are more staples to the genre rather than premium content. That being said, I think the best case of the Wonder Waff's reuse was in Call of the Dead, where it was not only recycled content, but it was a reward for killing George. And at that point in time, no one batted an eye. And while you could argue that the level of fatigue from zombies hadn't set in since the mode was still relatively new, it objectively was not a new tool, but it was packaged in a way that felt new. And I do think that largely applies here in Shattered Veil. Now, of course, you can go to the box and use your Wonder Bar Gobblegum to try to get the Wonder Waff, but I wouldn't recommend it as the chances to get it are pretty slim. However, you can acquire it another way by doing a specific side quest. And honestly, I think this quest is really solid, as all you have to do is shoot some items located around the map that are just covered in a dark ether cloud, and it really just fits nicely into the core gameplay loop. It's not mind-numbingly easy, but it's not overly tedious either, and it's something that you can just ease into every game as it's a very natural and well-designed side quest. I also think that this Easter egg ties into the Liberty Falls intro cinematic, as when we see Richtofen drop the weapon inside of the elevator, the camera will pan to Sam, but it looks like the smoke completely entrenches the Wonder Waff, meaning that perhaps Sam had tried to hide it after teleporting Eddie by placing it in said plume of dark ether smoke, but I genuinely have no idea if this is true or not. It's just something I was thinking about. Feel free to correct me in the comments. All this to say, the Wonder Waff DG2 is genuinely so overpowered in Black Ops 6, and it's an absolute blast to use. It works well in nearly every situation, as it just stuns and kills entire hordes with ease. It works wonders in the Xerox boss fight, and it is perfect for climbing up the ladder into those higher rounds. Over the years, it's no secret that Treyarch has fundamentally changed what the value of a round is, as getting to round 10 was an immensely tough challenge at one point in this mode's history, whereas now, getting to round 10 can be done with relative ease. But that doesn't mean high rounds are all of a sudden easy, it just means that the weight behind the numbers has shifted a bit. And even though most of the maps in BO6 have a similar high round experience where you just kind of sit in a corner and perhaps spam a mutant injection every now and then, Shattered Veils feels the most dynamic, as there are multiple spaces to get to your round of choice. From running around training in a variety of open spaces to the mid 40s or 50s, to camping at spawn while using traps or holding out in the conservatory, using the Doppelgas containment tank, or even the most popular choice, standing ground in the elevator. There is such a vast array of strategies at the player's disposal that it really does go to show you that a well-planned map can take things that have felt monotonous throughout the entirety of Black Ops 6 and add in a breath of fresh air just by refocusing and shifting things around. But at the end of the day, it's everything in the map merging together, creating a sort of symbiosis, if you will, that does allow the entire package to thrive. And Shattered Veil does that very well, as the enemies, weapons, and general gameplay mix together excellently, creating a blend that players will want to revisit over and over again. However, that same energy that has been carried over nearly the entirety of Shattered Veil is quite mixed when it comes to the side Easter egg department, which, if you haven't noticed, has been a notorious problem throughout the Black Ops 6 Zombies lifecycle. Yes, there are the Wonder Weapon quests, which are largely positive, but the majority of side content in this map is primarily purposeless and honestly not very exciting. But I would be remiss if I didn't name a few highlights. Things like being able to turn Sam into a giant laser trap, the free fully loaded shotgun quest, the fog rolling in Easter egg, and then of course the secret round 100 boss fight, which is definitely my favorite. However, because of the way that perks, salvage, and the arsenal systems work, receiving rewards inside of BO6 Zombies just largely feels empty. And I know I've beaten this to a dead horse in the podcast and in my other videos, but if you create a system where you don't allow your players to push past the ceiling of it, then side Easter eggs are always going to be useless. Which is why when it comes to surface level side quests in Shattered Veil, or any map really, Treyarch does a fine job, as there are a number of small tasks for players to seek out to acquire more salvage, get a free perk or two, as well as locate all the hidden power-ups in all of the mansion's nooks and crannies. But unfortunately, they haven't been able to go any deeper because they have trapped themselves in the corner of accessibility. And now, I like to be fair, so I will admit my favoritism towards Black Ops 4 Zombies, as it unlocked something in me that I didn't know existed, and that was having almost full-length side quests to build secret weapons or upgrade wonder weapons and equipment to gain even more rewards. The Golden Sport Fork is the best example, as it took the player on a wonderful mission to build this overpowered shiv that could have been considered its own full main Easter egg by today's standards. Or even being able to upgrade the monkey bombs in BO3 would be another good example. Just being able to take the tools at your disposal and push them past their limits. And while I know that this may not be the norm, I still think that it could be an interesting path for developers to explore, as they are closer to delivering that by having things like the Wonderwaff DG2 side quest in the game. That being said, I still think they could push it a little further by either having more upgrade paths for the wonder weapons themselves, or even allow players to upgrade lethals, tacticals, or even score streaks. Not to mention, why aren't we able to create specialty devices that could be unique to a singular Zombies experience? All this to say, there is a reason why this hasn't happened in modern Zombies, and it's because of one singular mechanic: the crafting table. The funneling of every piece of equipment into this awful catch-all is just a boring aspect of game design, as it removes any and all ability for depth or variety in a new map, and instead gives us more touch points for similarities, as it is the rationale as to why our side Easter eggs generally end up being so blasé. However, I do have some solutions I will be breaking down in a future BO6 Zombies year-end review video, so stay tuned for that, but just know that in the meantime, Treyarch does have the power to make this mechanic more fulfilling, but until they do, our side quests will be lackluster indefinitely. What's interesting about this video is throughout its entirety, I'm mostly praising Shattered Veil for a lot of its innovations towards bringing the modern Zombies mode to a place that is where myself and many others believe it should be. However, what I find so frustrating about Shattered Veil is not that it has spots where it falls short, but the fact that Treyarch has had this ace up their sleeve for so long and we're just now seeing it. It has been 5 years of hearing developers talk about making Zombies more accessible, increasing main quest completions, and making things more in line with the casual player base. And over that same time period, the hardcore fanbase has been consistently ignored when asking for things about increased difficulty, more impactful narrative, challenging boss fights, unique side quests, the list goes on. And we were always told that accessibility was top priority. And while I understand wanting to broaden the player base, I would simply love to know when the hardcore map is coming, since the last 5 years have been entirely broad appeal and focused on appeasing the layman. Then along comes Black Ops 6. Fans started thinking, finally, here is that game that is going to give casuals and hardcore fans what they both want, but it still leaned heavily one way, until Shattered Veil. And you know, for a while, I thought that this current developer team at Treyarch wasn't able to make experiences similar to classic Zombies, not because they're not talented, but because they're just different people who want to do different things. But Shattered Veil proves that Treyarch is fully capable of creating maps of classic caliber, as they clearly were inspired by that era's main quest design, having a heavy amount of collectibles, unlocking secret areas, and having interesting puzzles. But at the same time, developers are still seemingly afraid to go all out to make things challenging because they perceive they are going to get backlash. My only hope from all of this is that they take it even further with some of the areas that fell flat by increasing the difficulty for pinnacle quest moments with the HVTs, elongate certain puzzle steps, or add more of them in general, add in light RNG, or even small cipher decoding sequences. And to be honest, I can even live without that last one, but you get what I mean. And while I know some of you will disagree in the comment section, this idea that every single bit of content in a Zombies map needs to be discovered in one day, well, I just don't agree with that sentiment at all. COD Zombies maps are supposed to be unique experiences that are designed to last a lifetime, and the entirety of a quest and side activities have been dumbed down so heavily that the time period of getting to learn a map's intricacies has been cut down substantially to a few days, if not less. But looking on the bright side, Shattered Veil is without a doubt the best map inside of Black Ops 6 Zombies, and maybe even the best map in the modern era, bar none. It has the closest resemblance to a classic Zombies experience that obtains unique attributes and attempts to elevate the franchise using that amazing COD FPS loop, creative main quests, and deeply curious and transformative narratives. And while the absence of challenge in the quest is felt, and the lack of meaningful side quests are most definitely a sticking point, it would be completely dishonest of me to ignore just how close Treyarch is to making the perfect modern Zombies map. And despite my optimistic outlook towards the future of Black Ops 6 Zombies, there are two questions that continually come to mind after all is said and done. The first is, will Treyarch ever go all in with this formula? And the second, do they even really want to?